In this video, we're going to explore from government to societal oversight in the different areas of government responsibility. So we have I break down government responsibility into 30 sectors, from education to environmental control to the military to the police. We're going to go through them all. But how does government to societal oversight look in each of the sectors? Let's go over it real quick. I'm not sure if you can read all that from this. You probably could zoom in, but go over it. We get rid of welfare altogether and we go to a charity system. It is structured, it is funded. We got mandatory donations from every person that would match somebody's tax rate right now. So we reduce the tax rate, but require that same taxes to be a donation into the charity system that is structured. You donate to a charity structure that, or charity system that matches your philosophy of how to help the poor. So you have less government, but government's still going to be there as an oversight. There's going to be a lot of oversight in the charity system, from the funding of the charities to the caseworkers, to make sure there's not abuse and the like. So there's oversight from representatives in the charity system, a lot more than there is right now to the charity system, because we go totally away from it and we do that mandatory donation, which means now you have to have some oversight. We have a dozen different family law organizations, all doing family law, all have a court system, all have a way of doing arbitration and the like. And then religion will make sure religious freedoms are upheld. That's what the religion sector is there to do. So you don't have overall government, you just have some representatives making sure that they're not going outside of their framework, make sure they're not doing abuses, make sure they're not doing civil liberty violations, making sure they're not doing fraud and abuse. We have a lot of systems for that, representative systems. Everybody's going to be represented by a rating agency and a competitive government, and they will have boards, representatives strictly to regulate each issue. There'll be a rating system for every one of these 30 sectors. So in the foreign protection system, we have a separate oversight for the diplomats. So we have 12 different groups of diplomats, all coming from different perspectives. So you have a representative agency that you choose, and they will send representatives up to be your diplomats. The commander-in-chief will have roughly 12 different groups. You would have a good hierarchy within those 12 different groups. Each citizen selects who their commander-in-chief group is going to be, and then they get incorporated into their hierarchy. But that will show, that group will be based, that your percentage of members will be based off of your group, your commander-in-chief group will be funded based off your membership. So if one commander-in-chief group has 10%, they get 10% of the budget. If they get 5% of the people, you get 5% of the budget. 15% of the people, you get 15% of the budget. And that's going to equate to personnel as well. Military corporations, more private sector, but that still needs significant oversight, so that will have it. The oversight comes with a military capability system that's handling about $1 trillion a year. So there's significant oversight from a rating system to make sure that there's no self-dealing in that, no corruption. Military Authorization Agency is the biggest authorization, or biggest part of oversight from representatives that authorize anybody with inherent government power in the military. So it has to give that badge, that authorization for anybody to be in the military to carry that gun in the weapon systems. In the violent crime mitigation system, we have 12 different prosecutors and 12 different legislative bodies that make 12 different groups of prosecutors, 12 different legislative bodies that make law. Now there would be one violent crime set of laws. But we have 12 different groups of prosecutors, 12 different groups of police, and they have to work together and structured. The Law Enforcement Authorization Agency would be huge in oversight by representatives. They are made up of representatives. they have to give that badge to that police officer, to that prosecutor, to that prison guard, to that judge and the prosecutors and anybody that has court powers. So they give that power there. So the court system will have a rating system to make sure that civil liberties are being authorized, and the law enforcement authorization will be there to make sure you're respecting civil liberties. So civil liberties has a lot more protections in this system than it will be. Just because you're free enterprise does not mean it's a free for all. That's never what free enterprise means. Prison and corrections, 12 different prison systems, very free enterprise in there. Different ways of doing it, a lot of oversight in that. You're actually getting paid to have good results. And you can't not violate civil liberties. There's, again, the law enforcement authorization agency will be the final one that can pull that badge, but the rating system can rate you so low that you're going to fall below the threshold and you're going to lose your badge to be a prison guard and the like. You have to stay ethical, make sure there's no corruption and the like. Healthcare, again, we want to get rid of government control, about a dozen different healthcare systems out there that you get to choose which one you want to belong to, and they will do things differently, from major high regulations to lower regulations, and every citizen picks which one they want to go with. Obviously, you want to go with the higher one, but sometimes that higher one has such a high cost that you can't afford that, and it will take time to increase those regulations up. Same thing with banking regulations. You get to pick. Elizabeth Warren is huge into banking regulations, but so you can go with a Elizabeth Warren type of regulations, or you can go with people who are more libertarian type of regulations where there's a lot more freedom. You get to select which system you want to go into for the banking regulations, and we're going to have about 1,000 different currencies, one standard. There's a whole video on that. There's a good way of doing that. Insurance regulations is huge. That's going to take care of Social Security and the like. We're going to have 12. We're going to get rid of Social Security, and we're going to go to about a dozen different retirement systems. You have with that are required to. They are all required to make sure there's a minimum standard, so people are not becoming elderly and having to be taken care of by the government because they did not have enough money. So there's minimum standards there. Food regulations, there's going to be about a dozen different ones of those. More private enterprise. I call it competitive governance, which is very much free enterprise. So that's going to be huge. So it's not government necessarily saying what the quality of the food is. 12 different ones with a rating system to make sure the food is safe. Education, 12 different school boards. You pick the one that you want. There's a lot to it. Look at my competitive school board system. We got manufacturing. Obviously, there's manufacturing rules from the government, state and local and federal, and that's going to be split up between 12 different governments. So it's going to be a lot of going to representatives, making sure it doesn't get harmful to people outside of the transaction from what they're doing. So it's called negative externalities. So make sure the negative externalities are curtailed. You can't get it down to zero because we can't have society and we cannot have liberty if we have a zero negative externality. But the rating agency is going to make sure it's limited, curtailed. HR related issues, human resources, and then sales. That needs to be regulated, but it needs to be regulated, in my opinion, in the free enterprise system called competitive governance. But in that, there can be some negative externalities, so there will be some limitations. Identity, personal and business, a core function of government, but if we do it in the competitive governance system, you bring free enterprise benefits into that with high standards. And it will increase the standards, but it allows people to buy better services. A lot of people, the common joke is that you don't want things run like the DMV. Well, if you have a dozen different quote unquote DMVs, all with high standards, you can pay for better services, pay for better hours, pay for shorter lines and the like, more locations. So but you also have a oversight group that's making sure things are done right. Environmental, obviously, we need one set of laws to some degree on that to make it done right. But you can have 12 different perspectives. You get to pick your environmental regulatory agency, and then there will be a lot of times you cannot. That's a prime example of negative externalities. The oversight group makes sure there's not negative externalities. So you're regulated by your environmental organization, but they have to say you have a minimum standard. There are a lot of ways to get there, so it's not going to be all the different regulatory standards there are now, where it's done by the letter of the law. We don't allow too many times for a company to have different approaches to reduce down the pollution. You have to do it by the regulations, and a lot of times that does not bring the best results. It brings a lot of expense without sometimes so much benefit, environmental benefits. So the oversight will still be there. You cannot go too far in polluting, but you have to have some pollution, or we don't have a standard of living. We go back to the Stone Age, and that's definitely more less environmentally stable. Work safety and disability, obviously there needs to be some regulations around that. So there will be an oversight group to make sure you're not going too far, and there's certain standards. But there's a lot of ways to make that happen. So there's not a one standard. You go to a competitive governance in that. Roads, we're going to go to competitive roads with a rating agency that's make sure that we're not going anything dangerous. We have standards for roads and the like. So there'll be a governing body with a hierarchy, but most of the power in the competitive governances. Media and communication, fighting for civil liberties, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the like. That's going to be a catch-all sector. Then the land and water, who owns what can you do on the land and the water, and regulating those. Obviously, that's going to be connected to the environmental regulations. And then the ownership is going to be in Sector 25, the identity, personal and business. That's going to be ownership, but land and water has a lot of regulations, what you can do and what you can't do. Again, a lot of these overlap, but there's going to be some clear demarcations of what one sector does, what another sector does. All of them with the rating system. That's going to bring that oversight. I think that's going to be it for this video. A lot more to see at Haley2024.org. Until the next video.